So I just want to welcome you on behalf of the Centre for Social Entrepreneurship and Social Economy. I hope that by the end of this conference, the CSESE will come very easily to everybody here. As part of the Faculty of Management, we have developed our focus over the last 2 years to be inclusive of the social economy as a whole. So since we had the Social Enterprise World Forum, a lot of you will remember it in 2011, the growth at times had been painstakingly slow. But the feat was never on the agenda. In particular, we are now focusing on teaching and learning, on capacity building within the sector. It is so important that we do build the capacity and that somebody takes ownership for that. It won't happen by itself. And we also look at consultancy and research. There is a growing awareness of the importance of the social economy in South Africa. And hopefully South Africa will be in the same position as, for instance, the European countries, where the social economy is looked at as a major source of employment. If we just look at Italy, at the moment, it is just looked at as, and the Social Enterprise World Forum is actually moving to Italy in 2015 because of the huge cooperative movement there and what we can learn about employment and the cooperative movement. So our time has come. It's the rise of the social economy. This colloquium is about, and our Dean said it so eloquently, courageous conversations. And to look at the issues on the table: policy and regulatory framework, education, job creation, access to finance, and most of all, also the implementation of policy. And to ask, how can we go forward? What can we do? What needs to happen for the social economy to flourish and take up its rightful role as a very productive job-creating sector? So we will, at the end of this colloquium, come up with a declaration, a request to government to engage with us and to take the agenda forward. We need to look at the issues here and make recommendations to bring about a better understanding of the issues that needs to be addressed to make this economy thrive and to unleash the power of change makers. We invite you to be part of the new agenda to the rise of the social economy. Thank you.
What an absolute pleasure to be here this morning in your great company, and thank you for supporting us today. My name is Manuel, the Executive Dean of the Faculty of Management, and Susan Steinman is one of my dearest colleagues. Ladies and gentlemen, I had the honor to meet Minister Trevor Manuel a couple of years ago. Well, initially I always observed him during his budget speeches, and as much as I agree to his budget speeches, what I really appreciate is the way in which he has weaved humor into the world of figures and making the budget count. And then last year, Minister, we met again at one of our Soweto conversations when the National Planning Commission was kind of doing the final streamlining on the National Development Plan. And I'm glad to report that since that day, we've made some progress. Since we last saw each other, our faculty has graduated a further 2,000 students, and of those 2,000 undergraduates, about 1,800 walk off the stage into jobs in companies. And then there's a lot of work being done at the postgraduate front, but I think the most important part is the concern that we have about the public sector. In 2014, we will have a brand new department within our faculty dealing with public management and governance. It will focus specifically on all the business skills that we would need in the future, and there's a massive investment in there, and we hope to roll out this whole unit will be about 1,100 students. So slowly but surely we're getting there. But Minister, today you are here despite of a hectic schedule, and we really appreciate that. And I must say that in our consultation with you, you're a man of your word, you're a man of wisdom, you're a man who understands time, and you're never late, and you always respond. Therefore, it's great for us to welcome you here today. And then also, just not to mention, the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, and specifically Maurice for your presence here today, and for everybody who's contributing to making this a wonderful success. And from the Faculty of Management side at the University of Johannesburg, have a wonderful time, and let's have a courageous conversation.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, I would like to extend a warm welcome to all of you. Our resident representative in South Africa, Dr. Holger Dix, asked me to bring his best wishes to you. He regrets that he can't be here with us today. But ladies and gentlemen, this colloquium will officially launch the cooperation between the Center for Social Entrepreneurship and Economy and the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung. So first of all, I would like to thank the director of the center, Dr. Susan Steinman, her team, and also the University of Johannesburg for partnering with us in on this very important topic of the social economy in South Africa. Since not all of you might be familiar with the work of the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, please allow me to say a few words about our organization in South Africa. The aim of the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung is to promote democracy and the rule of law worldwide. Freedom, justice, and solidarity are the basic principles underlying our work. As a political foundation, we are closely affiliated to the Christian Democratic Union, which is the current governing party in Germany. And the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung is named after Konrad Adenauer, who was the first Chancellor of the Federal Republic of Germany, and whose name is very much synonymous with the democratic and economic reconstruction of Germany after the Second World War. And you know, the concept of the social market economy also dates back to this period. In Germany, it's closely linked to the ideas of the former Christian democratic politician Ludwig Erhard, who in the 1950s and 1960s first served as Minister of Economics in Adenauer's cabinet and later himself became Chancellor of the Federal Republic of Germany. For many Germans, Erhard is regarded as the father of the so-called German Wirtschaftswunder. That means in English, the economic miracle. And this economic miracle of the 1950s kind of marked the introduction of the modern German welfare state. Inspired by the tradition of Catholic social teaching and ethics, Erhard at his time was looking for a third way between laissez-faire economic liberalism and socialist planned economies. And so with a special emphasis on policies of job creation and social security, I think that the introduction of Erhard's social market economy can be seen to some extent as the national development plan of Germany in the 1950s. Ladies and gentlemen, as in South Africa, small and medium businesses are still the main pillar of the German economy. Business, in our opinion, must be interested and serious about investing in social purposes that are sustainable and profitable at the same time. Therefore, many German enterprises invest in education and training of its employees to create a sustainable workforce. And let me tell you that just a few months ago, the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung sent a delegation of South African businessmen, trade unionists, CSO representatives, and also government officials to Germany to inform them about the system of the dual education for young apprentices in Germany. At that time, the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung could also show to this South African delegation how especially the German state and business cooperate together in order to create more jobs, especially for young people. You see that the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung is very much interested in sharing German information abroad. So with this colloquium, which is very important for us, focusing on the state of the social economy in South Africa, we, as the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, would like to debate policies that ensure long-term economic growth, reduce poverty, and improve the quality of life of all South African citizens. So in that way, I wish you a very interesting and informative colloquium with lots of fruitful discussions. Thank you very much.
if the minister doesn't feel welcome after being welcomed for the third time, then I don't know. It's my privilege, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the University of Johannesburg, which houses the Center for Social Entrepreneurship and Social Economy, to firstly welcome you here on behalf of the university, and then in particular to welcome and introduce the Minister to you. The Honourable Minister Trevor Manuel is Minister in the Presidency with responsibility for the National Planning Commission. He has been a Minister for 18 years, 13 of them as Minister of Finance. His first portfolio in the Mandela government was trade and industry. He is a member of the National Executive Committee of the ANC and has been since 1991. He is, of course, currently best known as the chairperson of the committee that crafted the National Development Plan and as the voice of the NDP. In reading his bio, I was reminded of the fact that he also served as chair of the Board of Governors of the IMF, as chair of the Development Committee of the World Bank, and that he has also chaired G20 meetings. No better person, in fact, to lead this first session of the colloquium on the alignments of the social economy with the objectives of the NDP. I also wish to acknowledge Mr. Pat Pillay. Mr. Pillay will facilitate the question and answer session with the Minister after the Minister has addressed you briefly. Mr. Pillay, of course, is a noted social entrepreneur, founder of the Life College Group in 1997, chairperson of Unlimited South Africa, and probably best known to most of us as a news anchor at ETV. Therefore, my privilege, Minister, to welcome you and to ask you to briefly address the audience. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. van Merwe. Lali, good morning to you. Prof. van Lille, Dr. Steinman, I must recognize my long-standing comrade. He lost the tie now that he got to the university, Dr. Folesani Mufamadi. Mr. Glitz, representative of Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. University is not meant to start this early in South Africa, so I'm very privileged. Something happened that brought you here this morning. I'd like to start by expressing my sincere appreciation for the invitation to start this very important discussion that you will have over the next 2 days. I want to point out that I have this problem. If you have difficulty in understanding it, Dr. Mufamadi will explain to you. I need to get to a cabinet meeting in Pretoria. And, the priest can't arrive late for church. And so I'll be a little bit late, but they'll let me off the hook. I can't remain for too long. So I want to, because people have taken the time to submit questions, engage in a bit of that. But I have my boss, Mr. Kulakani Mate, who is the acting head of the Secretariat of the NPC, will do the heavy lifting. I'll just take a few easy questions, Pat, and Kulakani must prove his worth this morning. Today is actually exactly a year since we sat as an extended cabinet in Lekgotla and worked through the National Development Plan in detail. Just to jog the memory, the Planning Commission was established in May of 2010. June of 2011, we placed before the country a diagnostic of what we thought the major challenges are that confront us. We took that diagnostic and had some pretty broad discussion across the country. Very important within that was we wanted young people to take responsibility, saying that by 2030 people like me are going to be clearly out of play. And if we want young people to take the decisions that they must, because they will be running all the institutions in the country by 2030. They must be involved now. We can't defer those decisions until 2030. It's fundamentally important that we create this transition, step aside, and allow enthusiastic young people to come through, determined to take the decisions now. And out of that interaction, we crafted a draft plan that we handed to the President on V-Day 11/11/11, and used that for further consultation. And on the 15th of August last year, we handed the plan to the President in Parliament. The 16th of August was a tragic day at Marikana. But a year ago exactly today, Cabinet had internalized the plan, debated it, and agreed on implementation. Now, the fact that as a Commission, we continue to engage in discussions about the plan says to us that the plan has actually become the centerpiece of development discourse in the country, and that's very important. And I think that the discussions that we launch here today about the social economy and the National Development Plan are a fundamentally important part of that. Let's go back to the plan. The plan talks about the fact that if we want transformation, then as South Africans we must learn to unleash the energy and the power of this resource we have in the country that we've tended to forget, and that is the power of people. And I want to make a distinction because one of the issues that we discussed at the Soweto campus in those conversations was the fact that we had with us Professor Lee. I think he hailed from Korea but was at one of the American universities. And if we look at the development path of Asian countries, what distinguishes them is that they've never had mineral resources. The investment has been people, and that has been the big agent of change. Now, in South Africa, we're talking about this hotel this morning. It was apparently the residence of Lord Milner when the English occupied the Boer Republic, and he built this house here for himself. Because of gold, it was all premised on mineral wealth and not on people. And so part of understanding what we need to do in the context of the National Development Plan is to go back and recognize the deficiency in our investment in people. And regardless of which way we look at it, if we try and understand what is happening in education in this country, there still is a vast gap between education available to the children of the rich and education available to the children of the poor, because our investment in education, in people, is still at the low ebb that it is. And so if we want to understand transformation, then it's fundamentally important that we put investment in people at the epicenter of that transformation. Now, that transformation and the focus on people requires an immense investment in personal development, not just of individuals, but also of institutions. And part of what we need to focus on is, in fact, the rehabilitation of an interesting concept that we have given a rather narrow definition in South Africa: empowerment. Because empowerment must assist us in challenging assumptions about the way things are and can be. It's not just about equity provision, and heaven help us, it can't be about tenders. It has to be about something fundamentally different. And so it's very important that we take forward this discussion about the social economy so that we can effect the alignment of the objectives of the NDP and contribute to growth that is focused on getting everybody working, doing something even if it's not narrowly for gain. There's a lot that can be said for fixing collapsed fences in schools, to growing vegetables, to supply school feeding schemes, to participating in school governing bodies, to mobilizing resources to invest. We've tended to draw a distinction between one thing and the other. And one of the sad features of our democracy is that we've created two classes of people: those who are empowered because they have material wealth and access, and those who aren't, and people who aren't empowered are actually disengaged. And so we've created a situation where people no longer build their own houses, bemoan the fact that education is poor, and we haven't been able to create the same level of activity that would bring people into improving on the conditions of their own lives. So, something I'll come back to in a moment. As people involved in development, you'll be familiar with the characterization of development as a process of mobilizing, organizing, deploying, and managing the use of resources to achieve maximum social and economic returns. Our most important resources are our people. The energy and commitment to change. So how we mobilize, organize, and deploy our people is fundamentally important to the achievement of our development objectives. Related to this is the importance of building the capabilities of the nation, human, physical, and institutional capabilities. I see that my good friend Prof. Mazwai has arrived, and it's well timed, Chief. I was about to make the point that I want to go back to those conversations at the Soweto campus. You see, the great thing about using a university like UJ and the Soweto campus to involve small business people in transformation is so fundamentally important, because if we think that universities are only, and UJ has this enormous challenge of being a big university, having many people wanting to get in, and they can only slice off people with the best grade 12 results, it excludes the majority of people. Yet there's a very large cadre of people who make do, battle through every single day, and they're forgotten by our university system. So in the context of the social economy, doing these things over and over and over again and demonstrating what and how we reclaim this term empowerment is actually an enormously important part of the equation that will transform the social economy. In addition to our people, of course, we have natural resources. But it's not just gold and platinum and diamonds and manganese. It's also land, water, our ocean, our forests, and our amazing biodiversity in this country. But merely having these is not enough to guarantee development. In fact, if you look at the National Development Plan, part of the concerns that we expressed, and we've devoted a big chapter to sustainability, is that our natural resource endowment has been poorly utilized. So land has been poorly used. We're a water-scarce country, and we use water very badly. And we emit large quantities of CO2 into the atmosphere. This is a very poor basis for sustainability, and part of what we have to do is to understand the connection between the present and the future. And as some writers have said, we've only borrowed the earth from our grandchildren for a short period. And what we have to do is to invest in a way that leaves more of it for them. So intergenerational decisions are fundamentally important, and understanding our use of natural resources is a very, very important part of that interconnection between us and the future. It's a very important point across the African continent, where some countries that are very rich in natural resources continue to display very high levels of poverty and deprivation. I don't want to pick on any country, but Nigerians don't mind us talking about the problem of an oil-rich country that hasn't been able to convert it. An oil-rich country that still doesn't have an electricity grid, an oil-rich country that has seen immense wastage. And part of the reason for raising it is that we, as South Africans, must never become comfortable with gold and platinum and so on. We need to understand what the transition is about, and I think the NDP brings this into very sharp relief. It's how we turn the resources into productive assets that generate other kinds of resources, including financial resources. The process of transforming the natural resources into productive assets requires skilled and committed people who share a common vision, as well as more advanced technologies. Incidentally, these are the areas in which our economy is most challenged. The challenge for us to think about differently and to apply new solutions. The worst position we can find ourselves in is that of paralysis caused by applying yesterday's logic to prevent yesterday's crisis. I mean, knowledge is an interesting thing, and Dr. Mufamadi, I'm talking to you, so knowledge is a very interesting thing. Because it's not a good predictor of the future. I mean, there's a lot of discussion in the financial world about new regulations and so on, but those new regulations are trying to prevent the collapse of Lehman. The world has moved on, applied different norms and standards. And I think that if this is all that we have, then we create this sense of paralysis because we're trying to prevent what has already taken place. And so part of the challenge of thinking about the social economy is understanding what we haven't done yet. If we don't invest in the upgrading of skills of our people, we find ourselves lagging behind other nations who actually have far fewer resources. Similarly, if we don't invest energy in ensuring that our nation is committed and workers motivated, we will always achieve less than we are capable of achieving in all aspects of life. The example of our education is a case in point. The outcomes do not match the resources. People who watch us on television when we express our dissatisfaction with services or when we embark on strike action see a nation at war with itself and tearing itself and its future apart. Indeed, when they read about the opulence we allow to coexist with deep poverty and the year of the wage gaps and living conditions of workers, they wonder how we hope to have a stable country. These things represent us in bad light to those whose investment we want, but in fact they are bad for our cohesion as a nation and they affect the commitment of all to the common project. If we do not address these problems, harness and deploy advanced technologies, we will remain at the bottom of the value chain and only capture a small share of the value that can be created from our own resources. We also need to upgrade our infrastructure capacity and get everyone involved. This is in a nutshell the story of development. But what, you may ask, has this got to do with the social economy? Firstly, I want to declare my discomfort with the view that there's a real economy and everything else is less important. There are important connections between different aspects of social and economic life. If we neglect to pay attention to the living conditions of workers today, we are sowing the seeds of future instability. Unfortunately, in this country, this kind of neglect has gone on for many years, and the instability is not something that may or may not happen in the future. It is happening now. We must unleash social capital, the ability of individuals in a group to develop relations of trust, cooperation, and common purpose. Much of this will be manifested in a range of informal institutions and relationships. But it's very important in understanding this informal set of relationships that we never neglect the health and well-being of workers and understand that it's a fundamentally important part of improving productivity. But I digress. Marie Bouchard of the University of Quebec at Montreal defines the social economy as, and I quote, I'm going to read it in French, so put on your... No, it's okay, I'll do it in English. Yeah. Economic activities carried out by cooperatives associations, mutuals, and more recently foundations. It is neither private nor public, but it combines private yet collective entrepreneurship and management with goals that are not focused on profit, mutual or public interest, unquote. While I understand the need to define the field as Bouchard tries to do from an academic perspective, I fear that such a definition may serve to feed the stereotypes about what matters more than others. Bouchard does not make such a value judgment. My contention is that the preoccupation with who and what is more important than others is to miss the point. What we need is for all sectors, all parts of the state, and all citizens to be seized with one objective only, and that's how we can contribute to building a better future. The actions of national government are as important as the actions of provincial and municipal governments. They each play a part in an important role in facilitating and supporting social and economic activity. Provinces, for example, are responsible for providing an important service any nation can provide its citizens: education. But without functioning local government to provide energy, collect and manage waste, schools will not be able to function. Similarly, the actions of government and private enterprise are as important as the actions of citizens organized into different formations, such as cooperatives, stokvels, burial societies, community policing forums, trade unions, sporting associations, and religious organizations. The weaknesses in how the different spheres of government work together and lack of cooperation between government, business, and civil society are in part a result of this idea that some spheres and some sectors are better than others. It's not very helpful in the context of the injunction by the National Development Plan to utilize all our resources. We are one economy and one people. This is not to say that there should be no division of labor. The aim of the National Development Plan is to enable everyone to achieve a decent standard of living. This comprises good education, housing, water and sanitation, a safe environment, adequate nutrition, employment, quality health care, recreational facilities, among others. To achieve this, we need the economy to grow threefold. 11 million more jobs will have to be created, and income per person has to reach 120,000 per person per annum by 2030. There are many other sector-specific targets in education, infrastructure, rural development, health, social protection, the economy, and community safety that are carefully selected to enable the attainment of what we've described as a decent standard of living. And this for us is a major challenge. I mean, I can pause and reflect only on something like the jobs challenge. It's not a promise. It's not related to the elections next year. It's not related to any of those things. I think we take fairly basic. You can take the demographic projections over the period to 2030, make an assumption. We made an assumption. It may be based on yesterday's kind of understanding of an economy, of full employment, and so it's a 6% unemployment rate, and that's what gives us the 11 million jobs required. If we can change the way in which society functions, the way in which employment happens, then all of these become variable. But I think it's very important to think through how we transform the economy to be able to absorb many, many more people. So I want to start with our growth and employment objectives. Employment elasticity is very high. For every 1% growth in GDP, there's a 0.76% growth in the employment rate. Focusing on labor-intensive activities linked to exports would push the number of jobs created for every unit of GDP growth. In respect of raising employment, the NDP notes as follows, and I quote, South Africa has to raise the levels of employment and through productivity growth, the earnings of working people. South Africa needs faster growth and more inclusive growth. Key elements of this strategy include raising exports, improving skills development, lowering the cost of living for the poor, investing in a competitive infrastructure, reducing the regulatory burden on small businesses, facilitating private investment and improving the performance of the labor market to reduce tension and ease access to young, unskilled workers. It's only through partnership across society that a virtuous cycle of rising investment, rising confidence, higher employment, rising productivity and incomes can be generated, unquote. These economic proposals in the NDP are coherent and straightforward. This is what the fight is about, this paragraph. It's a coherence and straightforwardness, I think. However, a number of measures need to be taken to address some of the historical challenges that continue to hobble our economy. They include high levels of concentration as a result of the monopoly concessions given by the apartheid government to limit destructive competition. Firms were allowed to allocate markets and have legal cartels. This increases barriers to entry along the value chain, stifling entrepreneurship. It's amazing just standing back, looking at the shape, and I remember 20 years ago sitting with McGregor's Who Owns Whom and trying to understand the trends on the stock exchange and so on. 20 years later, we've deconcentrated, but you look at the South African market, it's still quite oligopolistic in its shape and character. Low levels of competition have led to relatively high profit margins, but little new investment or innovation. Low savings mean that the country is reliant on foreign capital inflows, which reinforce the oligopolistic nature of the economy, since foreign investors invest in existing high-profit firms. High cost of living, largely because of apartheid spatial planning. The poor were located furthest from places of work and spend a large percentage of income on transporting themselves to and from work. There is evidence that travel costs severely limit job search in terms of both scope and length of search. Low skills among workers as a result of deliberate policies to provide education of inferior quality to the majority. This in turn impacts on the productivity of workers. This is also an area in which post-1994 policies have had limited impact. And then a lack of investment in infrastructure and maintenance has created bottlenecks that serve as a brake on growth. In the context of infrastructure bottlenecks, this road out here it defies all logic, but we're talking about the vast separation between rich and poor. This is an exceedingly wealthy part of the country. Boggles the mind. The result is an economy with a cost structure that is out of kilter with our level of development, skills and labor. An area where evidence from across the globe suggests we can create more jobs is in the small business sector. Cost of the job in the small business sector is comparatively low and the sector tends to be labor intensive. However, there are significant barriers to entry that many individual entrepreneurs face. Could the social economy sector help to overcome this challenge? Social economy actors can leverage economies of scale by using joint purchasing and marketing strength, increase bargaining power, mobilize savings, provide a learning environment. And I want to digress and make the point. One of the big battles we have is the lack of self-belief. There's an enormous challenge in townships across the country. People who have no access to state resources come here, live in the twilight, utilize exactly this. They've set up networks of support. They have no access to the banking system. They have no access to traditional wholesalers. These people have eked out an existence by mutual support and battling in this kind of way, and they offer price advantage. And so we stand back and we tend to be unhappy with the fact that small business people have risen in this kind of way. But we've never quite understood that it's not the state. We have to empower business in the social economy to be able to create this infrastructure to drive the change and create a difference. But back to small business. The varied social and economic activities social economy actors can build include social capital that's necessary for building stronger communities. We actually have many examples of success stories of companies that were built based on these networks of social economy activities. Perhaps the best in the world in the textbook case is KWV, that co-op of wine producers that grew as a co-op, supported by legislation, but it grew phenomenally, and one of the reasons why wine farmers in South Africa have always done better than their counterparts in France or elsewhere was because of the existence of this genuine co-op. There are also other examples in this country, like national cooperative dairies. Eventually sold to Parmalat, or one of those. But NCD was one of the other textbook cases of how farmers with just a few dairy cows could link up, could invest jointly in dairy facilities. And the transformation happened like that. I'm glad to observe that in 2 parts of the Eastern Cape, 3 parts of the Eastern Cape, one right at Fort Hare, another at Middeldrift, and the third close to Uitenhage. Smallholder farmers are linking up again in this kind of way and re-establishing the networks that drive the dairies. So we're not short of examples in this country. In fact, Santam and Sanlam originate from various Help Mekaar associations. Volkskas was established in 1933. It was first registered as a co-op to channel the savings that the bank attracted into loans for small businesses that would employ Afrikaners and help solve the poor white problem. I believe actors in the social economy can contribute to the attainment of these goals of the NDP in many ways. A vibrant social economy sector with citizens who are actively engaging in development can mobilize community resources to support improvements in education and hold schools accountable. Problems such as crime, substance abuse, and improving social services are not insurmountable when communities work together with public officials and businesses. Don't look too far. Look at the drug problem in El Dorado Park. Look at the response of the community and see this problem being tackled head on. The idea that the provision of services such as housing, education, health, water, security services, and electricity should either be provided by the state, the private sector, or some unscrupulous operators who prey on the desperation of our people is not congruent with the idea of utilizing all of our resources. The idea of social entrepreneurship in the provision of these services remains underexplored. It's quite possible that our legislative and policy instruments are underdeveloped and restrictive. Why do we not have social entrepreneurs and cooperatives made up of members of the communities that approach the Department of Basic Education to take over the running of schools? What happened to the idea of communities building and running their own schools? There are models of how this is done in other countries. Where are the hospitals run by cooperatives or trusts? I want to reflect on a personal experience. My wife was in Nairobi involved in a car accident, and everybody in South Africa, white and black, called and said, "Oh, please get her out of there. What about the health care?" Well, she was taken to a trust hospital established by the Aga Khan Trust. And she says she's never visited a health facility as good as that in South Africa. It's a not-for-profit, not a state institution. It's a not-for-profit. And the matron was able to explain to her that people serve on the board of this hospital, and there's a waiting list. And the only remuneration that people get is lunch when the board sits. They do it as a national service. They do it because they believe that health services should be good and not for profit. What's wrong with us? Why can we not learn? We want to import the worst of the United States, but fail to learn from the examples that Africa presents us day after day. Why have we not found more innovative ways of organizing housing delivery in the face of so much need? Should poor communities which cannot afford to pay for private security such as ADT or whatever, accept the schools that their children attend and the neighborhoods in which they raise families will always be ravaged by drug lords? What, if anything, can we learn of the actions of parents? I've mentioned El Dorado Park, but there are a number of other examples like that. In closing, not only do we need everyone to be involved, We also need all ideas to be put on the table and tested. If social entrepreneurs do not rise to the challenge, our development will be held back by those who charge inflated prices and deliver inferior or no services. You've got a smorgasbord of discussions over the next 2 days. Thank you very much for listening to me this morning.
Good morning, everyone. Minister, thank you very much. I had a chat with the Minister before, and as he mentioned, he needs to run. So what we're going to do is try to get, say, 2 or 3 questions to him. And thereafter, we're going to spend a bit of time a little later in the morning with Kulekani, who's going to pick up some of the other questions and issues. What we did was an email was distributed as widely as possible to people gathered here by the university, and we solicited some questions in advance in order to be as expedient as we could. So some questions were sent through, and we received them last night, and I had a look at some of them and tried to put them into some kind of coherent structure. And I'm going to try to get 2 or 3 through to you before you run. And the first one comes from Chipo Mushwana, and it's a little bit of an introduction before the question. Often the challenges of finding effective and sustainable solutions to many social problems are substantial, and solutions require many of the ingredients associated with successful business innovation. And the implication here is in the classic commercial space. Should we look at the social and commercial economy not as opposite sides of the continuum, but as parts of a continuous system? What are the Minister's thoughts on transformations that need to be instituted from a political and economic standpoint in South Africa to enable social entrepreneurs who often occupy that space between the social and the commercial? So let me summarize. The question is, on the one side we have the classic...
Do you want me to respond to them individually or together? I'm easy, Pat.
Is it? Okay. So I think what we do is respond to them as you see fit, but in summary, the thrust of this question, I get the sense, is on the one side we have a classic NGO, and the other side we've got the private enterprise. And social entrepreneurs often occupy that space in between. How might we respond from a political and an economic standpoint to enable social entrepreneurs to better operate in that middle space?
You know, if one looks at some of the examples that I was able to mention in the talk this morning, I think it's important to recognize that none of these issues remain permanent. I use the example of dairies, and dairies are interesting because they tend to lend themselves to cooperatives. In India, the largest dairies are still co-ops in the old sense of the word, partly because people can't afford many more than 2 or 3 dairy cows, put them together, and there's mutual benefit of it. And initially, what starts out as a survival mechanism can actually assume a new dimension. And I think that if you look at either KWV or NCD in South Africa, that would be the case in point. The key, I think, is to analyze where exactly those gaps are. Let me mention something I didn't pay attention to this morning. It's the area of financial resources. Now, I mentioned Marikana, and you know, when a bit of analysis was done on that mine, it was found that there were 14 micro-lenders of a variety of different kinds. That the average worker on the Marikana platinum mine was spending about 50% of their gross wage on servicing these loans. Now there's massive abuse. There are things that pretend to be garnishee orders that aren't garnishee orders. But if one looks at South Africa right now, there is this complete bifurcation. I look around this room and people like ourselves tend to be able to borrow cheaply. People who start out poor borrow at exorbitant usurious interest rates. And they find themselves remaining in debt. And there's a vast chasm between the two poles of this discussion, partly filled by Stokvels, but we haven't yet been able to take forward this. And I want to draw in an experience from another country. Recently, the Archbishop of Canterbury was concerned about payroll lending, and he picked on a company, a British company that advertised in South Africa called Wonga. And he spoke about the evil of this because workers tend to have too little come payday. He then discovered, having made the announcement and named the company, that the Church of England was actually invested in this company. And he prominently and publicly committed to disinvest from the company. But he made a different commitment, and that commitment was to re-establish what used to be, and that was the establishment of credit cooperatives at parishes. Now, this doesn't have to be a national body. When you talk about parishes, it's very highly localized. But as we do these kinds of things, we actually find ways of filling gaps differently. And you know, if I look at Mr. Mushwana's question, I think that there are those vast opportunities that present themselves. I mentioned social housing, for instance. It doesn't have, I don't think that we position things between sort of extortionist kind of profit or not for gain. I think that there's a vast middle that we need to engage with, and perhaps by tomorrow, when there's a declaration out of this conference, there'll be a better focus and better appreciation of what that middle contains and what the opportunities are that present.
We can, I suppose, look to something the UK did a little while ago when they created the CICs and those community interest companies that tend to operate between the classic NPO and the classic private company.
Sure.
And that may, I suppose, provide something of a vehicle that's a lot more efficient for that middle space. Have you looked at all at that in some detail?
You see, I think that there's this vast untapped space. I think even the notion of cooperatives as being anti-capitalist is misplaced. There are a variety of ways. If you go to institutions like the World Bank, the IMF, and the United Nations, as an example, for housing and so on, they've got cooperatives that run the institution. So a staff member, we sending Dr. Mufamadi to the World Bank. He arrives there. He will need to acquire housing, and so the co-op will embrace him and offer him through their system an opportunity to become an owner of housing. He doesn't have to go to Merrill Lynch or Bank of America to get the loan, because cooperatives actually sit in the space. And I'm saying that there's vast untapped opportunities, because in our minds, things have to belong to one or other pole of a political or economic debate. But it's in those specialist type of companies. And if our laws are deficient, let's raise those kinds of issues. We've just replaced the board, because in our legislation we have also Cooperative Banks Act with a special regulator and so on and so on. So the facilities are there. There's a new board that's just been announced for the cooperative banks, a system. We can take the system forward, but it needs a lot of initiative, and hopefully people like those who've committed the 2 days to this discussion can begin to take that forward.
Just to shift the conversation a little bit, this is the question that came through from Machaba Motiane and Conrad Stiftung from CAS. Social grants in South Africa have been criticized for creating dependency on the state. How does the NDP seek to address this problem and remove people from intergenerational poverty?
I think that part of what we have is a bit of a battle. If you look at the entire architecture of social grants in South Africa, we don't actually have dependency syndrome that presents in quite the same way as in many other countries. Perhaps to our shame, we don't have it. What we have is a social old age pension. The assumption has always been that working people should provide for their own retirement, and that the social old age pension would be available to people who haven't been able to contribute. There's a major reform of that system so that we can get there. But that's one part, it's a very important part, and it's a part that extends to around 2 million South Africans who are aged and need the dignity. The second part of it is the disability grant system. Third part of it is care dependence grants for family members who are disabled frequently. There is a system of foster care grants, and then a child support grant, which is actually a very small amount of money. Hotly debated in townships everywhere about who should get it and who shouldn't get it. But come 18, the person goes off the grant. Now, the problem in the overall architecture is that a large part of people who are desperately in need of some support are young people who haven't been able to find employment. What the National Development Plan proposes in respect of young people are a few issues. One of those is whether it's possible to bring young people into employment, and sometimes the risk of employing somebody permanently is a huge risk. And so the youth wage subsidy is one proposal that we make. It's a very hotly contested proposal, but I think we would start from the premise that you can't have young people unemployed forever because employers say it's too big a risk. The other proposal we make, and it's very difficult. I spoke about discouraged workers, and the big problem is that there are enormous poverty traps in South Africa, and if you are a young person who passed grade 12 and you happen to live in Taung, where do you go to find a job? You don't buy the Star and look at the classified section. You don't have the internet and know what jobs are going. You don't know where the ILO office is, Vic. You don't know where the Department of Labor office is. And so you remain in that poverty trap. And so it's thinking through these kinds of issues that we have to be able to talk about openly, because if we don't do that, then we have a system of grants that we think produces dependence, but doesn't actually help get people out of particular kinds of traps. And I think it's very important that from a developmental perspective, we actually think of resolving these contradictions together by recognizing where the needs are. And we've made proposals, for instance, on transport subsidies to try and get young people to look for jobs and so on and so on, and that's going to be very important. The other part of it is, and while I'm talking about this, in the legislative amendments to the broad spectrum of labor legislation would be something that includes creating kind of employment agencies through the Department of Labor, because again, there's a learning. I look at Germany, for instance, and you go and register as unemployed, and if you registered as unemployed at the labor office, you then get benefits. At the moment, we look at the number of people in employ, and we deduct that from the entire age cohort, and that's how we arrive at an unemployment number. It can't be correct. So we have to innovate in this area, and I think the way in which we look at the support system of social grants would have to be transformed in the context.
Okay, I did promise you 2 or 3, so I'm going to make this your last one.
Kulakani had better come and sit here and continue seamlessly. Sondela Budi.
A question here from Jesse Naidu of Clothes to Cash Exchange. And this is of particular interest to people gathered over the next few days, being in the space of the social economy, social entrepreneurs, and so on. How does government plan to assist social entrepreneurs specifically who are attempting to solve South African social problems through sustainable business and not just being donor dependent? When will this be available, and if so, what would it be? And how do we start the process of engagement to get meaningful engagement with government?
Jesse, I don't have a short answer. You know, there are things that governments generally are not very good at. I don't know that government has a kind of ready-mix or ready-made or pick-a-mix solution to how to support social entrepreneurs. I'll even be as bold as to say that we aren't very good at supporting SMMEs either. We once thought that, and you know, let me talk about the DNA in these things. We thought that we could get a system going, and I'm speaking about 95, where on the one hand you'll have an institution that would signpost. So somebody like Jesse needs assistance. Where do you go? We thought that we needed another institution that would provide guarantees. So an entrepreneur comes along, the bank wants collateral. That entrepreneur doesn't come from wealth, so there is no family collateral. How do you deal with the problem? And so we created a collateral guarantee scheme called Kula. And because the Department of Trade and Industry then couldn't set up a branch in every village, we sat down with the banks, asked whether they would administer this program for us, and so the system was designed as follows. Jesse Naidu comes along to the bank, speaks to the local bank manager, looks at the business plan, says, here's a very good idea, contacts Kula, receives the plan, says, let's trigger the guarantee. And so you can bridge the divide between a past where some were children of wealthy, frequently racially defined, and others were left behind. You could bridge this by creating a guarantee scheme. So the state wouldn't become a retail lender, but would support through this guarantee. And after about 3.5 years, an assessment was done, and the banks had been negligent. 63% of the lending of the guarantees of Kula, however they dressed it up, 63% of those guarantees were actually given to white entrepreneurs. So that your golfing buddy who had been a client of the bank for a long time, you could remove risk, because the incentive in the bank is every time a loan fails, then your own promotion is going to be curtailed. So you can remove risk by bringing buddies into the scheme and actually not utilizing it in the way that you must. And I think that from that point, and it probably goes back to about 99, we faltered. So I don't want to offer Jesse a short answer. I am saying that even in the National Development Plan, Kolakani, we must say that we haven't given adequate attention to how to support the small and medium enterprise sector, but also the social entrepreneurship sector. But and just observe what President Zuma said yesterday about the National Development Plan. It is a framework that takes things together, but frameworks are not good enough. You actually need detailed plans. Now, if out of this conference here, there's a willingness of people who are happy to put shoulder to the wheel and take that section and give it a granularity that the National Development Plan needs, we will be willing to receive that and explore whether we can take that forward in a way that would give it an impetus. You know, we can't for a moment presume to have covered the entire spectrum of life in a very short period that the National Planning Commission has existed, but we know that we've constructed a framework, but that framework needs a lot of detail, and we're hoping that conversations such as you will have here between today and tomorrow help us take forward those kinds of issues. But it does mean that it requires a commitment to transformation. Not just handing over a declaration at the end of the conference tomorrow, but we need to see hands up of people who can help us resolve this, because I know that in this room are people who understand both sectors, small and medium enterprise sector and social economy, and I don't want to make that distinction because of the way in which I responded to Mr. Mushwana's question earlier. It's not either or. There has to be a way in which they articulate, but we need to understand that better, and we need to develop the mechanisms of how we take those forward. So perhaps this conversation here can help the National Planning Commission. I will report that to the Vice-Chancellor of UJ, and he'll be very proud that his institution is taking it forward in that spirit.
What we'd like to do is pick up where we left earlier on before breakfast. And Kolakani is going to take some of those questions, but again, remember we've had some questions mailed yesterday, and I might go to those. And then we've got some that come in fresh off the floor now. Just give me a sense of time. How much time do we have for this? And if you can remind me and give me a countdown on time, please. How long? Is it? 20 minutes, okay. So if you can just give me a 10 and a 5, please, I'll try to come out in time. Okay, Kolakani, I think the minister at the end sort of extended an invitation, but also a challenge. But there also was candor in the fact that he admitted that the NDP doesn't necessarily have an answer to the last question that Jesse posed, right? In terms of how does the National Planning Commission and the NDP address the needs specifically of social entrepreneurs and social enterprise. And there, Susan touched on it just now, around the world in Europe, the social sector, social economy is viewed so seriously because it does contribute to jobs, it does contribute to GDP, and it certainly does address social issues. And there seems to be far more sustainability in that approach as to simply having organizations step up and look for grants. And I don't disrespect those organizations, but there seems to be more sustainability in a social enterprise. So I think let's start and pick up on that. Many people in the room are going to be concerned about exactly the same issue if I look at some of these questions. What would your comment be then? And knowing, of course, I don't want to put you on the spot unnecessarily, but the minister's admitted that the National Development Plan doesn't address it directly. Having heard what you have this morning, how might you respond in a way that may be more concrete to extend on what the minister shared with us?
Well, thank you, Pat. And let me just say that if you've ever been put on the spot, it is today. Because firstly, I'm made to answer for a gentleman who has been a minister for almost 20 years and obviously has a lot more experience than I do. on many of these issues, but I'll give you my best views on this. How I would answer your question is I would say that more than the NDP being a framework that provides the space for a whole range of initiatives to be developed into the necessary detail, it also does something else, and that is to try and, in a sense, promote the idea of inclusivity. So what we'd say in the NDP is that if we want this country to move forward, if we want to transform society, and it's the point that the minister also made, is that we need each other. We don't need each other only in the various sectors where we are, but we need to be able to work together. So to break these walls that create silos so that we're able to learn from one another as people, as organizations, and build something that is much stronger. So the idea that we need an inclusive process of development at all levels, whether it's the level of development of policy, you need a process that is inclusive to avoid capture by interests, whatever they may be. So development happens when there is these inclusive institutions and inclusive processes that draw on the strengths of various people, various organizations, and various actors in society. And so, in a sense, what I'm saying is that while the NDP may not be dealing with the issue of social entrepreneurship enough, and there are many other areas that the NDP, purely because of time and the necessary research not being available, were recognized as important but could not be detailed out. But the space is there for sectors such as this one, with people who are obviously more knowledgeable about the field, to work with us, to define this further, provide the necessary detail so that we can then work together. So let me just make one example to show exactly what we mean by this. We're also quite aware that as the National Planning Commission, we are just not in a position to engage with everybody to the extent that we want to. So working with various people in education, for instance, we have something that is developing there, which is called the National Education Collaboration Framework, where we're able to draw on various people, unions, government, and business, to really figure out how to solve education. We would be looking at a similar model in other sectors where we say we know that there are people who are passionate, knowledgeable, and able to contribute towards this, to work with us to solve that problem. So the invite that the minister put to the sector stands, and we would be keen to find a way of how we interact with the resolutions of your, and whatever you call it, declarations or whatever that come from here, not just as a handover to the commission to say, there it is now, make it work, but how we jointly take it together, whether it's about addressing policy issues or practical issues of implementation going forward.
Now that's a further assertion to the notion that the, let me just tighten this. How do I? Sorry. I think that's a further assertion of the fact that we're taken seriously here, and we can take a document through, as well as a delegation of people who you're open to working with to better understand this, and thank you very much for that. I want to speak about job creation a little bit more. There were a number of questions that came through on job creation last night and this morning. Just a very simple one. How does the NDP relate to the Jobs Fund in this country?
Well, firstly, I'll start at the points that the minister raised, because it is actually important to just recognize the scale of the challenge. So in the NDP, we've calculated that to achieve what economists call full employment, you'd need to create about 11 million more jobs between now and 2030. That is an enormous challenge. And it does mean that we cannot rely on the methods of the past to create jobs. It also means that we've got to try every idea and test every idea to be able to create the number of jobs that we want. So the Jobs Fund was and continues to be, I think, an important and innovative idea to say, how do we tackle the challenge? It is small. It can't answer all the problems in relation to jobs. So we need more like that, hopefully different, and hopefully dealing with different sectors. And so I would say that the National Planning Commission is effectively saying that the problem is too big for us to fight over these little things about whether it's the job fund, whether it's the wage subsidy, this or that we should actually put all ideas on the table. We should test all ideas, and ideas that work need to be taken forward, and ideas that don't thrown away. And at least we would have learned something if we allowed that. If, on the other hand, we do not allow ideas to be tested and so on, we will never know whether they work or not. So certainly promote an idea that we need to be open to a whole range of ideas, test them, and what works, take it forward, and what doesn't, ditch it.
That question, by the way, I didn't mention, came from Roche at Learn to Earn. Just staying on the jobs issue, there was another question here, which is a little broader and perhaps maybe even philosophical in its response. How do we create jobs in an infertile environment of protracted labor strikes and dismissals and work at the workplace? And this is from Samuel. I can't quite read that. Sorry, I can't read the surname well enough, but it's Samuel. Thanks, yeah.
Well, Samuel raises an important point. Again, you will recall the minister in his own speech, he referred to a situation where he says that people who see us only through their television boxes, they see this nation that's tearing itself and its future apart in how we express ourselves when we are angry, dissatisfied with this or that. Now, this is not to suggest that there should not be any strikes and things like that. These are rights that are enshrined in our constitution. But there's a bigger question here that says, how do we resolve differences in this society? And even prior question is an important one. Why is it that when there are these differences, we fail to resolve them kind of more amicable ways, but that we actually end up destroying even what we have? Whether it's taking these drastic measures that start to destroy jobs, that destroy the infrastructure that we've created and so desperately need in communities. It speaks to how we as a nation need to find what in a sense helps us to get where we are, which is sit around the table, face our problems and solve them. My own view here is that perhaps we have not invested enough in growing that ability in our society. We have allowed a situation where we each retreat to our corners and only come to the table when things have reached a point where it is difficult to resolve. So it speaks to a bigger problem about how we resolve difficulties in this society. Others have referred to a need for a social compact where we sit down and say, we understand that we are in trouble. our economy is not growing at the rate that it should. We're not able to, as a country, reduce the levels of inequality. What do we need to do together to resolve this? Without that, I think we will continue to see the kinds of things that Samuel is talking about. But it isn't the sort of thing that you blame business for, blame labor for, or blame government for, because you can, in fact, find fault in all of those. It is the recognition that we all need to sit down and fix these things. And yes, I think we are seeing elements of that beginning to emerge in relation to resolving the issues in the mining sector and so on. And we just need to do more of that because we need to create more jobs, not to destroy the ones we have.
This question from Tebisile Nyambe, Public Procurement and Social Economy. There's a little bit of an introduction to it, and then she poses the, and then we actually have the question. The new growth path identifies the social economy as a sector with the potential to create jobs, and specifically refers to the need to, and I quote, encourage state procurement from and service delivery through organizations in the social economy. What is government doing to ensure that a framework for monitoring and encouraging public procurement from the social economy is indeed in place?
That's not an easy question to answer. I am tempted to ask Dr. Mufumadi to help me answer this one. Now
Cooperatives working in real time.
I say so because he too spent more time in government than I have. But essentially, the way I'd like to answer it is to say that, I mean, both the national, the new growth path and the national development plan are important frameworks of our government that set priorities and long-term goals. A lot more needs to be done to make sure that those find expression in the programs of government, the various departments and so on, so that when they procure, they are utilizing and procuring from social enterprises. It's an underdeveloped area because, as the minister said, it's not enough to simply put something in a framework. We've got to do a lot more than that. So I would say that this is an area that we need to work on and do more. Some departments may be doing better than others, but on the whole, I think we have not done enough. But the good thing is that there is recognition, and we need to build on that recognition. And certainly people from this sector need to help government figure out how to do these things. I was saying to one colleague earlier during the break that sometimes the problem is simply that people are afraid of that which they don't know. So our procurement systems require, for instance, that to procure from somebody, they've got to have a tax clearance certificate. They've got to have a certain pieces of paper that you need to line up so that I can buy from you. So the first thing we will ask you is, can you give me this? Can you give me these pieces of paper? And then the thing falls flat. Now, that talks to the gap that exists in, one, the broad policy intent and our ability to put in place the systems that makes that policy intent realizable. And that's the work we have to do to make sure that we change our requirements if we are able to then make good on that policy intent.
Now, there are a number of questions that are related to what you and the Minister have now admitted is perhaps a gap in understanding, and I'm not going to labor the point, but I'm giving you all of those as well. So, for example, I know Shona's got a question here. Shona from Shona Quip has got a question in here. And there are a number of other specific social enterprises that are asking for how is it that these enterprises can engage better? There's something to be offered. Models have been built, products and services have been built. They're of value to society. These individuals have grown it often from the dust up, but find a dislocation. So I'm not going to labor the point. I'm taking it all to the fact that you're open to hearing conversations later on how we could engage. But there is one more, and I've got a few minutes left, maybe one or two. Let me just find my place. Can I just have, you may have answered this already, but I'm going to ask it just in case it might elicit a slightly different answer. And if you can be very as brief as you want, or you can actually just treat it as answered. How have aspects of civil society participation and public regulation been incorporated into the NDP's socioeconomic policies?
What I'd say to that is that I think it's more than just incorporation. The NDP promotes an idea of active citizens who participate in all aspects of life of society, whether it's in the development of policies or in holding accountable those who are tasked with delivering services, be it education, health, and so on. Part of the failure is that as a society, we have outsourced that to somebody. And as it turns out, that's been a bad model, right? We elect people and we leave them to get on with it. We send our kids to school and we neglect to check what happens. We don't even open the exercise books and workbooks to see what's happening there. So the NDP is saying that if we want to transform society, we've got to be very active at all levels. At the level of a school, at the level of policy making, at the level of delivery on a policy.
I'm also aware that quite a few of these questions should really be directed to the Department of Trade and Industry. And to be fair to you, we understand that. But as a social sector, it probably helps to respond to the invitation that you and the Minister have put out today, which is to engage with you, and of course for this sector to know that the NDP has the ability, as it is located in the Office of the President, to perhaps then engage with the DTI and other related departments, social development, etc. Can we ask that in the process of coming to you as a result of the work done at this colloquium, that when we do work with you, that you could perhaps connect the people representing this colloquium to those departments who would perhaps have clearer answers on some of these issues?
I will not sit here and pretend that the NPC will solve all problems. Some of you will have had dealings with the DTI or any other state department and perhaps been disappointed in one way or another. So I'm not going to say that, well, come to us, we'll solve your problems. What the NPC provides an opportunity for is, in fact, to relook at the issues, relook at how we get different actors in society to work together. And as I've said, there is a model that's working in education, and we would hope that in other sectors we would be able to pull different people together to recognize a problem, figure out how to solve it, and to work together to solve that problem. And we would certainly do our best to do that without overpromising that we will solve every problem that is brought to us.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I'm told my time is up. Mr. Kulakane Mate, Acting Head, National Planning Commission, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.